when there is any sort of abuse, and honestly, this was a form of spiritual abuse, of silencing your victim so that their story can't be heard, so their story can't be told. And our biggest fear was all of those things that had been force-fed to us of, if you say it, then you're going to damage somebody else's walk. It was devastating.
Can people really change? What are the moments that shape us? What causes some people to drastically switch their beliefs while others seem to stay the same? Is it something that happens to us? Is it something we can control? Let's explore these questions together through personal stories of those who have encountered the shift storm. Hi, welcome to The Shift Storm. This is a podcast about change. I'm Chris Cowan, and with me today are my friends Matt and Mandy Lomeli. Matt and Mandy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Just briefly tell us a little bit about the two of you.
I'm Matt, she's Mandy. We've been married for 24 years now. We were married back in Salt Lake. Now we live in Georgia. We have two beautiful children. One is 15. She's entering a sophomore year in high school. Our other one is 10, and he's going into fifth grade soon. And that is a brief introduction about us. We also have a couple dogs, a cat, chickens, a few fish.
And my understanding is full-time ministry has been a big part of your lives as a married couple, as Christians. Would you say that's been part of the change, like at least externally?
In the early days of ministry, there was this naive, innocent outlook on life that we would be doing this forever. It was a lifelong vocation that we would never walk away from. A lot of changes have happened, and it doesn't mean that we're less Christian or less than anybody else because we are no longer full-time ministry. It just means things are different. And we hope that our story will help others who might be struggling with what they're supposed to do with their lives.
Yeah. Let's go into the prehistory. How did the two of you meet?
This takes me back to when I was living in Omaha, Nebraska. My very first job was for a movie theater. I worked for a movie theater. A buddy of mine that I went to high school, he got promoted to a theater out in Utah and asked me to come help him with management. As an assistant manager, I was looking to get out of there because where I was at, oh boy, that manager was a piece of work. So I was quick and I wanted to get out of there. So when I transferred out, my first day there, as far as driving out, that's when I walked into the movie theater in Salt Lake. I walked upstairs and right away, Mandy looked at me and I knew that she wanted me. Chris, that's pretty much how
I'm seeing a little shaking of the head from Mandy.
it's because that's my gift, Chris. I still give her the shakes.
The backstory that he's not telling you is that we had been flirting on the phone for several months by this point because he would call to talk to Dion, who was the GM.
Okay.
We'd be flirting on the phone. And so what he also didn't tell you is that he literally drove nonstop 12 hours from Omaha, didn't even stop in to freshen up, take a shower because he wanted to meet me. He came straight to the theater so he could meet me.
Looking back, would you have taken a shower? Do you think?
Looking back, I think there's a truth between both of those stories if somewhere you meld them together.
But the point is that it was literally a love story from the movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. It was.
Yeah.
We met the week before my senior year of high school started, and I missed every single high school or senior year high school dance because he was a manager and I was just a lowly floor staff person.
Conflict of interest.
Yes.
Well, that just makes it more spicy.
It does.
Yes. So we had to keep our relationship secret for a while, but we've been together since I was 17.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a little baby.
That's awesome. Were you both Christian, going to church at that time?
No.
Or okay. So how did you
Sundays were for football. back.
Were you raised Christian or at church or anything? Any religious influence at all?
I had some time in my childhood involved in the Mormon church. I was even
Mhm.
baptized Mormon at the age of 8.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Okay.
but yes, actually. But for my family, it was we were low income housing, food stamps. My mom reached out to the Mormon church, so they assisted our family, and
Right.
it wasn't about like a testimony or a conviction or anything like that.
It wasn't
So
that you felt a burning in the heart at Joseph
no, no,
Smith's.
nothing like
Okay.
that. Nothing
That's
like that.
how did we wind up in Christian ministry then?
I had quickly walked away from that previous institution when I was a teenager.
Mm,
Thankfully, my dad had told me I had the freedom to believe whatever I wanted. He didn't have
mm,
faith, but he always gave me that freedom. And I was because of our situation, I was bullied and picked on because of where I came from. So
mm,
the kids that were acting a certain way on Sundays were the totally opposite at school during the week. And so it just embittered me. Didn't want anything to do with it or
mhm,
any type of religion at all. So went through middle school and high school without any interest. But when fast forward to when Matt and I got engaged, the couple that had introduced us were believers and they were part of a non-denominational church and had invited us to come to their church, and I felt like, okay, we're engaged now. I want to be married in a church, and I want
mhm.
our future kids to maybe have a better understanding of who God is than what I've ever had. So we started attending a non-denominational church and expressed our interest in being married. And we were, although we were not believers, they put us through premarital counseling and those seeds were planted. But we were still not believers when we were married in that church.
Yeah. And so once we were married, we moved down to Missouri to help my father in his business. And at the time, that's when the Left Behind series was super popular.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
If you remember that craze, which they're fine, they're good
How
books.
can you not? You still find them in every thrift
Right.
store across
Yeah.
In
America.
every library book sale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's your little sound bite. People ask my salvation story. I was saved in a bar.
Yes.
The bar was his dad's, and we were helping his dad run his business. It was super quiet, super slow most of the time, and I'm a voracious reader, and
Yes.
I love picking series of books because I don't like it when a book ends, and I just like to keep going.
Yeah.
And so I just looked at the top
Well,
sellers,
then you were
local.
made for Left Behind. 'Cause
Yes, yes, and at the local Walmarts, and so I was quickly just taken aback and had no idea that all these things were in the Bible, and was quickly saved sitting in a bar in the middle of Missouri.
Reading Left Behind.
Yes.
And Matt, how
So
did you respond to that in her, and, like, how did you get sucked in?
How did I get sucked into this whole Jesus thing? It didn't really move me one way or the other that she accepted Jesus. I was still doing my thing. It wasn't until we moved back to Salt Lake, and that was for a job opportunity. We were attending a church. I've always been interested in the end times theology. I like hearing about the end times. When we were attending the church and I was listening to this, I don't want to say rapture style presentation or end times, or I realized I was sitting in the audience in my chair and I was listening to it like full intent. And I realized, oh, I like this story, but I realize I'm not on the team yet. I'm on
Wow.
the wrong side as of right now. Like if it was to happen right now, if
Yeah.
things were about to go south or go sideways, whatever you want to say, I was not in a good position. And that's when it's not like I accepted Christ right then and there. It's okay, I need to look into this for myself.
Mm.
What does God say about this? And that's what kind of opened my eyes. So it wasn't long after that that I made the decision to follow Christ.
So you're now both saved and rapture secure. Talk to me briefly about the transition into ministry.
In downtown Salt Lake, I was a paralegal. And I had also been heavily involved in ministry in the church, just serving whenever, wherever I could. And the pastor approached me about coming on to be the children's ministry director. And I immediately jumped at the opportunity. I was not happy in my current situation at the law firm. I just felt like I had been praying for a long time that God would open up a door for me to do something else. And I don't remember if it was necessarily ministry. I just wanted an out from where I was at. And I was so excited at the chance to be in full-time ministry. I had the naive, innocent mentality of, oh, it's going to be kumbaya all day and just singing and praying and Bible study together all day. So I jumped at the opportunity and went full-time staff there and was the assistant children's ministry director at the time, not realizing that I was being lined up because the current children's ministry director was being pushed out. Okay. And again, I was naive. I didn't see the things that were happening behind the scenes there. And, within a few months, that children's ministry director was gone and I was promoted into that position. And I think it was a year or so before we found out that I was pregnant with Judah. And by this point, we had been married for 8 years or so, and we had been trying unsuccessfully for several years to have children and had suffered some losses and just backed off from a lot of the medical interventions that we had been trying. And a year after we made that decision, and within, 6 months of starting my job at church, found out I was pregnant, and we were very excited about that. And in the third trimester of my pregnancy, I came down high risk because I had preeclampsia, so high blood pressure, water retention, and I was put on bed rest. And during that time, the pastor approached Matt.
Yeah. So I was still working for the movie theater company. I had worked my way up, not because when Mandy and I met, I was an assistant manager. I worked my way up to general manager. And in fact, when she mentioned that the pastor approached me during this time, I was on Sundays going in and I was serving on the video ministry, the video audio, and I would help capture, run cameras, get all the good shots. But there was a new ministry starting to open up where they were going to be doing a radio broadcast and approached me to say, hey, do you want to come on full time? Because we need somebody to push start and stop. Okay. So that's how I felt my job was after saying yes. Here's the thing is that going from a career that was pretty good money for the movie theaters. So we had that decision. We had going full-time ministry, Mandy being a full-time stay-at-home mom, and having a newborn with our daughter. That was 3 life-changing occasions that happened just like that. They pretty much all at the same time. And yeah, that was okay, God. If this is your decision for our lives, then this is all you, because nothing about this makes sense. Who walks away from a career? Who decides, okay, I'm going to stay at home when my husband is taking a big time pay cut and we have a brand new child and we're starting a family. Yeah. And so that's what got us into ministry. But if you think about movie theaters, is that a lot of 90% of the staff at a movie theater are teenagers. That's their first job. It was for me. And so when we were in the office one day, there was a change, like a discussion on a change was needed to be made as far as me, who was doing a job of a monkey, basically just hitting start, stop, edit, upload to podcast. Not to say anything bad about podcasts, of course, but But this other person wasn't necessarily enjoying where they were at as far as in youth. They
Mm.
thrive, they love pushing buttons like that when it comes to
Mm.
video, audio, things like that. So the transition for me into the youth ministry to step in as the full-time youth pastor, I don't think, I think God knew if, hey, Matt, we want you to leave the theater to be a full-time youth pastor, I think that answer would have been a solid no. Like that just sounds crazy. However, that was the best years of our lives. We were so
Mm.
heavily involved in the kids' life and in our leadership's life. And everything else really didn't matter when it came to ministry.
It was crazy. Neither one of us ever saw ourselves in youth ministry, but once we got plugged in there, it was, I don't know, I guess our golden years in ministry. It was so good for us. It was great for the youth kids. It was our everything. We were hosting home
Mm.
fellowship. We were putting on a full week of summer camp, all the activities.
all the
I did
messages.
all the cooking. Matt and a couple of the other youth leaders did all the teaching, and it was exhausting, but yeah, absolutely loved it.
Looking at that time in your lives when you were in a ministry that you loved, you were working with kids, working with teenagers, are there any moments that just stand out as, yeah, this was where I was supposed to be at that time?
How long have we been outside of Salt Lake?
It'll be 10 years
It'll
in
be, oh yeah,
August.
10
Yeah.
years. Wow, I didn't expect emotions to just creep up like this. So I'm going to try to keep it together. Instagram, social media, Facebook is a funny thing, is that even after 10 years, I'm still connected with not only the leaders, but with the students.
Yeah.
And there was times during ministry where the trust is a something that is earned.
Mm.
As far as when you're an adult, when somebody in high school or junior high finally sees that, hey, the Lomelis are in this for the long run, because prior to us coming in there, it was
A revolving
it was a
door.
revolving door. Yeah, that's a good
Mm.
word. Where why would somebody want to open up to somebody and expect them to even be there next weekend? So
Right.
it's when they started to come to me and then tell us what's really happening in their lives, like insanely deep stuff, what's happening
Yeah.
in their lives and what they're having to deal with, not only from a teen perspective, but as a family, their family structure. It's one of those things where it's okay, here's where we're at now, and here's what helps validate to me that we are where God wants us to be.
One of my favorites is after we had moved here to Georgia, we still had a lot of the youth kids that were keeping in contact with us.
I know where you're going.
And
I know where you're
one
going.
of them actually told her parents that for her senior trip, she wanted to come and visit us. And so, as a family, for her senior
Wow.
trip, they came out to visit us here in Georgia. And
Who does that?
so
Right.
it was those connections that we had made, and there's so many. There's so many. Like Matt said, we're still in contact with a lot of the kids that we were involved with in the youth ministry there, and a lot of the youth leaders as well. We've seen them
Yeah.
go on to start their own ministries, or
Or they get married together.
married, they have
Yeah.
kids now, and making us feel very old that these little brace face kids are now
Yeah.
grown-ups and having babies of their own. Well, it's just really cool to see that what we were involved with then, we still have a connection with now, even with
Yeah.
all of the things that happened.
And
We still have those relationships.
yeah, now it just looks a little bit different because I'm thinking of a couple guys that living in Georgia versus Salt Lake, you can't just
Yeah.
hang out. So it's
Right.
now it's just sending stupid reels to each other.
Yep. Yeah. I have several relationships like that where it's literally just it's a
Right.
meme based
Memes,
Right.
relationship.
reels, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But it's still that connection. And I think that's just a beautiful picture of the impact you had in that ministry on those kids' lives. That's the kind of, for someone to be like, yeah, for my senior trip, I want to visit the Lomelis. Like, such a beautiful picture of the impact you had, not only on that individual's life, but I'm sure the lives of many other students that you worked with.
I don't want to overblow the situation of this senior wanting to come visit us, because we have 300 students, and out of them,
Yeah.
only one wanted to come see us. So maybe,
maybe just one.
maybe,
like this.
yeah,
No, just that one was crazy,
just
but the
the
rest were.
one. Yeah, just the one.
What was maybe the first indicator that this wasn't to last, that something was going to change, or that things weren't all well?
Well, I had been seeing red flags. It's a term that isn't welcomed or appreciated within, the Christian community, but I really am an empath. And so
How dare you?
I I know, how dare I? The blasphemy. I've always been a person that can feel other people's emotions, and
Yeah.
I can read people very well. And I can almost always read people,
Yeah.
but my downfall is that I don't trust those initial readings that I have, where
Mm,
it's like, I'm wrong. I need to give them a chance. I'm overthinking, because I am an overthinker as well.
yeah.
And so I had been suppressing a lot of things that had been happening, those little slight
Kind of
things that
like
I was
this
noticing.
vibe
The
that you were
vibe,
picking up
yeah,
on?
it
Yeah.
was.
Okay.
Yeah, in the early days, we had just been, like, protected and loved, and I
Mhm.
was told that I was like a daughter to this pastor
Mhm.
and would always be protected and provided for,
Yeah.
and then things just started changing.
Yeah.
The vibe was off. We were no longer being invited over for the small gatherings. We
Mm.
were no longer privy to the insider information, if you will. Matt was, for a time, like the second guy. Like, he was the right-hand guy that when the
Mhm.
pastor was out of town, Matt took the lead. He was
Mm.
teaching from the front. He was he was managing different areas of the church. He was in
Mhm.
charge of the bookstore, the thrift store, a museum that the church was putting together. Matt was an integral part in all of these things, and slowly those responsibilities were just being taken away, and
Mm.
nothing was being said, though. Nothing was being explained as to why all of a sudden, that responsibility, that ownership was no longer there. And I kept telling Matt, something's not right. I've seen it happen. We've seen it happen to other people in the church, where
Yeah.
these things keep happening, and then all of a sudden those people are gone, and it's those, oh, they were crazy, or things were being
Right.
implied that they were doing something that they shouldn't have been doing.
Or they're
It's
not
like,
taking their meds, or what,
Yeah,
something.
right,
just
yeah.
like,
It's like
so.
these days everybody's ex is a narcissist, right? That's that's
Right.
Right.
But in this case, it might be true.
It actually probably is true.
okay. So before the break, we were setting the stage here with Matt and Mandy. They've been in ministry for a little while now, serving the youth, an integral part of their church staff in many ways. And Mandy starts to pick up on a vibe. The vibe appears to be shifting. Matt, you're maybe not quite acknowledging it. Looking back, do you feel like you can see the same signs? Do you feel like there was some denial involved? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there was absolutely denial. And maybe I was seeing the same signs, but I wasn't interpreting them the same,
Mhm.
because we weren't crazy. It
Right.
wasn't. And
Even though we were being made to feel like we were.
yeah.
Right.
And so what it really came down to was, we had a meeting with the pastor, and it was one of those meetings that you don't forget.
Mm.
It really did shape who we are now, as far as the shift.
Yeah.
We had a meeting, and it was told to me that he is going to have a new youth pastor either way. So, what that means, or what that meant, was either I needed to like fully commit to already fully committing,
Right.
or he was going to replace me. And this is after everything, I don't want to say hadn't worked, because this situation often had like a quick gone turnaround. Here's the official word, here's the official story. But I didn't want to believe that, because
Mm.
there was nothing that warranted it. So after,
Well, and I was asking probing questions in this meeting. What do you mean?
Yeah.
What has happened that makes you question Matt's or our commitment? This, and again, we're not inflating what was happening in our youth ministry, but
Right.
it was bigger and healthier than the history of the church had ever seen. It
Mhm.
was thriving. And I said, give me examples of what you're seeing that we're not executing to your liking, because our leadership is strong. The kids are super involved. We're here literally 50 to 60 hours a week, just grinding this,
Mhm.
not grinding, this was our heart, but
Yeah.
we were so fully committed. And it was, he never gave like a concise answer of putting a finger on what it is that he thought Matt was doing wrong, or what he was not living up to. And so it
Mm.
was a very confusing meeting.
yeah, it was very confusing, because it was like, you're not doing enough, but I can't really tell you how to do more type thing.
So just ambiguous expectation, no like clear like
Yeah, it was.
measured.
And for those who are watching or listening, it's not like we're one-offs.
Yeah.
This was happening to other people, but we didn't know that it was happening because of how it was presented to us. We just didn't think, because of our history,
We
that
we just believed it will never be
it will
us.
never be us. But in
Yeah.
fact, it was. And to validate what we're saying right now, is that I have a good friend who, in fact, going back to those memes, he sends me stuff every single day. Sends me stuff every single day. And he was actually he was a staff member with me. He was a coworker of mine. And he has since apologized to me for not seeing
Mm.
that we, in fact, were treated in such a way that in turn ended up happening to him as well.
Yeah, the
And
same
Yeah.
exact thing happened to him and
so
his family.
so we are not trying to inflate or make you feel sorry for the Lomelis. No, this really wrecked us for a while. This
Yeah.
wrecked us in the sense of, when we left.
The turning point part of that meeting was,
Yeah.
that was when the pastor said, shape up or ship out, pretty much. You have to make a
Mm.
decision. And we were going to be going away. I was actually at the time doing a work from home job, and
Mhm.
I was in charge of a team building exercise in Lake Tahoe that I had to organize and just be there for the whole thing. And Matt was coming with me, and he said, the pastor said, take this time away to figure out if this is really what you want to do with your lives.
Mm.
And when you come back, if you decide this is what you want to do, you're going to take a 25% pay cut, and
Wow.
you will no longer be this and that. And that's when I lost it. And I was like, how could you do this to our family? You told me that you would always provide for our family, that you would take care of us, that I'm like a daughter to
Yeah.
you. And you're cutting our family off at the knees and making it impossible for us to not just barely get by. Like, we won't be able to survive on a 25% pay cut with me as a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
And in this ministry setup, you don't just get the man on staff. The wife is expected to be there all the time just without pay too. At the time it was like I wasn't going to be able to take a job outside the home. The daycare situation would have taken all that money anyway. And so I was in a place of panic and I was so upset. And it was later told to me and to other people on staff at the church by the pastor's wife that I went off the deep end, that I lost it,
Mm,
that I was screaming so loud that it was going through the walls, which was totally not true.
right.
It was like we were just, again, being made to be like, oh, she's crazy.
Right.
She went off the deep end. And so it was those insinuations of what we had seen happen to other people was now happening to us.
To use an overused term these days, like that's a pretty gaslighting thing to do, right?
Oh, absolutely.
To be like,
Absolutely.
I'm giving you a 25% pay cut, and then like you're the crazy one for
Mhm.
Right.
not being like, oh, okay, okay.
And
Right.
again, it's not
That's if
like
you're keeping your job. Is
yeah,
am I
and
understanding
again,
that
it's not
correctly?
like we were a Texas mega church making a six-figure salary. We were
Right.
literally just barely making it
Yeah.
by on Matt's salary anyway, and this
Yeah.
literally would have cut us off at the knees. And so it was it was this whole like understanding of, okay, he's doing this to make us quit so that he
Mm,
doesn't have to fire us and look like the bad guy. And that I think
That's
is
exactly what it was.
and that's what has happened before us and since after us. It's these
mm,
manipulations that happen to push people out and make it seem like it's their fault and their choice
mm.
so that it doesn't come back on that person in charge, that
Right.
they're just firing everybody and throwing people on the wayside. It's always everybody else's fault and their choice to leave, which it
Mm,
never 1000% was not our choice. And it
right.
was the most heartbreaking thing that we ever did in ministry was to
Mm,
walk away from our youth.
I'm not looking at you. I'm
yeah.
not
It
looking at
was
you
the
right now.
hardest thing. When we drove out of Salt Lake a couple of months later, it was the week that our kids were at youth camp, the youth camp that I had planned and executed every single year. We literally drove past the exit on our way
We
out
were
of
supposed to be
town.
there. We were supposed to be there.
And it
Mm,
was so hard for us not to get off that exit and go tell
mm.
our kids bye because we were silenced. We weren't allowed to tell anybody
Anything.
anything. It was
Mm,
it was
We couldn't even say bye to our leaders.
no, we were silenced. We were implied threats.
I was told to stay away from the church.
It was the famous saying is don't throw grenades behind you as you're walking away. And it was
yeah.
this it's that whole it is a gaslighting thing of
Hmm.
when there is any sort of abuse, and honestly, this was a form of spiritual abuse, of silencing your victim so that their story can't be heard, so their story can't be
Mm,
told. And our biggest fear was all of those things that had been force fed to us of if you say it, if you cast doubt on any of it, then you're going to damage somebody else's walk. And we know what the Bible says about that. If you cause any of these little ones to stumble. And so all of those
wow.
fears were in
Right.
us that we didn't want to be the cause of anybody else questioning their faith or walking away from their faith. And so we were silenced and we had to drive away
Mm,
from something that we loved so much. And for them to be heartbroken and questioning, why are you leaving? Why all of a sudden aren't you our youth leaders anymore? And to
yeah.
not be able to tell them why felt like I'm sure that they felt like we abandoned them. And that
Yeah.
was so awful. It was one of the most awful things that we've ever had to experience. And I'm still getting choked up over that because it was devastating. And it was devastating. The entire situation was devastating. It wasn't just
Yeah.
the youth that we lost, it was this father figure that I
Yeah.
lost because I lost my dad when I was 15. And this person came into my life when I was a
Mm.
19-year-old getting married and promised to take care of me and provide for my family and told me that he considered me to be his daughter. And now this man totally cut us off. Was It was it was another form of loss and death for me. And obviously I still haven't fully recovered from it. We're doing our best. But yeah, the whole thing it was awful.
Yeah. So going back to that idea that you saying anything, rocking the boat, obviously there's a desire there to be respectful, to not be dramatic. But the thing that does stand out is this idea of like, I don't want to shake anyone's faith. And looking back on that, do you still ascribe to some of that mindset, or do you feel like how would you look at that now?
I think that was part of the plan, in the sense of, we talk about gaslighting, we talk about narcissism, we talk about all these different things, but you don't want to cause them to stumble, I think was being misused to hide the truth of what was really happening. I was just reached out to not too long ago by a former leader on our youth group who was, I believe, even there before I was. And it's been 10 years. And he says, whatever happened? What happened in that situation? So
Yeah.
he didn't even know after all these years. And so I think that causing people to stumble was, what's the word? So taken out of context and exaggerated that we were going to be the cause, if anybody heard about these things, that we would cause them to walk away from
Right.
Jesus. And that's how, I believe, how naive maybe we were, and how
Mhm.
maybe we didn't want to believe and to see and to understand what was really happening during the
Yeah.
situation.
If you look at the concept of various forms of abuse and how that is allowed to persist, narration control is a huge part of that. And we've all heard the stories of, oh, don't tell so and so because they'll be hurt by finding out about this, and the whole mind games and manipulation that often goes into it. And a lot of it is that narrative that can be perpetuated. Would it be fair to say there was like an element of brainwashing involved, or
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's hard to admit that. You don't want to admit that you were so easily manipulated,
Mhm.
but we were. And a lot of it was just this, again, it was this innocent naivete that we were in ministry and we were doing God's work. And
The pastor could do no wrong.
a lot of people in power have this charisma about them that wins over the
Yeah.
masses. And so some people who who have put bits and pieces together have there's been like two different reactions to it. Is, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Something similar happened to me too. Or
Mhm.
people have reached out to us since then and it has happened to them after we left.
Yeah.
And so they empathize, and we have walked through those seasons with those people.
Yeah.
But then there's another side to that of people who just simply refuse to believe that something like that could happen because
Yeah.
they never have experienced or saw that side of
Right.
that charismatic person. All they see and experience is what is put in front of them on a Sunday.
Right.
And it's that arm's distance, even pretending that it's a closer relationship than it is.
Yeah.
But they've never seen that side of that person that we did. And so they
Yeah.
are refusing to accept it. There's even been people that are angry that anybody would speak out against a person, and using those same things is,
Yeah.
you're going to ruin their ministry. Look at all that they've done. Look at all the hundreds, if not thousands of people that have come to the Lord through said church, ministry, pastor, whatever, you're going to damage that. There's different reactions to the little bit that we have shared, and we haven't fully shared our story with very many people, a select few, because we do have that hesitancy of we don't want to do that damage to anybody. And to be fair, to be honest, I still have fear. I still have fear that said person in leadership will listen to this podcast and is going to reach out to my husband and talk about getting his wife under control because he did that in the past. And how dare you? And
he's made that phone call before. While you were in ministry, he would like tell you, get your wife under.
Oh yeah, I'm going to keep this podcast PG just because I have very strong feelings on this man.
After this experience that happened to us about a year later here in Georgia, the pastor's wife here, that we were heavily involved in our church here, informed me that they had invited that pastor from Salt Lake to come out and guest speak at our church here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not realize how traumatized I was. And I didn't know what a panic attack was until hindsight. Looking back on that, I lost it. I hyperventilated. I almost passed out. I was crying uncontrollably. I didn't know I was going to have this reaction. I was so fearful. And thankfully, none of that actually came to pass. He never came here. But he did reach out to Matt a couple of times in the first few years that we were here. He was going to be coming down to some conference or something and wanted to meet up with Matt. And I was in this we were both in this mindset of, oh, we have to, not carry grudges. He's still our brother. And just come to a place of, oh yeah, you should go see him. We can't harbor that anger in our hearts. And did you ever go see him? I don't think you ever did.
No.
It never worked out.
It never
which
worked
is
out.
Fine.
It was just fine.
Now, a million times no, never ever would we allow that to happen again. Because again, it's the sense of controlling the narrative. And that's what was still trying to happen.
That's what was still
then.
trying to happen.
He was still trying
meetings.
to control the narrative.
Yeah.
So it was very traumatic. And I think that Matt and I have moved past a lot of that initial trauma, but a lot of that still comes up in our faith journey now.
I think something that people who aren't in the church, haven't grown up in the church or been involved in ministry might not understand, and it's something that I think you've done a good job of presenting here, is when you're in full-time ministry, it's so much more than just, oh, this is the job I get paid for. It's not just an employee-employer relationship in a lot of cases. And you mentioned already there was like a family type of relationship that was presented. This man presented himself as, you lost your father, I'll take care of you like a dad. And there's that family-like relationship. There's this spiritual leadership, spiritual authority, and that's all in addition to, I also have a major impact on your career and finances. Obviously, at a time you looked at that in a positive way. How do you look at just the nature of that whole dynamic of full-time ministry?
Wow. That is a great question, Chris. I'm sure glad you asked that. Not really. So full-time, so we've said from the very beginning, that was the best years of our lives.
Yeah.
And to this day, we love Jesus. It's not this experience or where our road has led us to has not moved the needle anywhere as far as away from him. But as far as full-time ministry, it's tough because you are not only, like you said, in an employee-employer type relationship, but depending on how much that you allow your employer, or in this case, your senior pastor, to have influence or to let them in on your life or lives is going to dictate on how it ends up for you. Andy mentioned that not only did this man marry us before we were even part of the church, but he was heavily involved in our lives from the get-go.
Yeah.
And full-time ministry is great. I'm not saying anything negative about full-time ministry.
Mhm.
However,
I have different thoughts on that.
I don't have anything against full-time ministry, but for where we are at, I don't think I'll ever do it again. I don't think even presented, because I don't want to put that pressure not only on Mandy and the kids, but I don't want to bear the burden of what is going to happen. Because again, our journey has scarred us in the trust. And I don't think that ministry, full-time ministry, needs to be like that. I don't think it needs to be abusive. I don't believe that it needs to put that much on your relationships or your family. I don't believe that what it does to your mind on somebody who's supposed to be your spiritual leader. I think, honestly, Chris, I think that too many men take advantage of that abuse. I think they do. And
Of that
so
power.
that power, yeah. And so will I ever do it again? Nope. Do I love Jesus? Yes. Do I cuss a little? Yes, I do.
Mandy, you said you don't see things necessarily exactly the same. I'm interested in your response.
I read a book that totally wrecked me for the modern church.
Left Behind too?
Yeah, it was that one. It was that one.
It's a Nicolas Cage reboot. Ruined it.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Are you guys
I want to
done
hear
with
you. I want to hear your book recommendation. Let's hear it.
Okay. Again, I hesitate to make this recommendation because if you are faltering, if you're questioning your faith, if you're weak in your faith, if you're vulnerable in your faith, it can totally derail you. And honestly, it derailed me. I read this book a few years ago, and it's called Pagan Christianity. It's by, I actually have it right here. It's by Frank Viola and George Barna. And it systematically goes through like what the modern church looks like and what the apostles, what Jesus taught the church should look like, and how vastly different those two things are. If Jesus or any of the apostles walked into a modern day westernized church, would they recognize it as a Jesus loving, following church? It wrecked me. And programs we have, the order of service, the traditions that we all have, whether we admit them or not, even as non-denominational, whatever we call ourselves, every church in America, Europe, whatever, every westernized church has its order of service, its expectations of the congregants, those in ministry, what they expect of all of those things, tithing, worship. And this book just goes through and just shows like we are not doing it the way that we were instructed to in the New Testament, including full-time ministry. Paul himself says that he provided for himself and those who were with him by continuing his own trade. He was a tent maker. He provided for himself. He never expected the church to pay him as a full-time pastor. Yes, the early church provided tithes and offerings, but that was for the poor. It was for itinerant pastors just to help them get through to their next church. It was for church planting. And church planting back then is nothing like what we see now. And so I never could go into full-time paid ministry again because I don't believe it's biblical. I don't believe that the setup that we have in place now is truly what Jesus envisioned for his followers. And I've wanted to read this book again. I read it a couple of years ago and it just rocked me so hard that I'm scared to read it again because it goes into so much more than that. But that's the gist of it, is we have come so far from what we were actually instructed and what was provided as examples for us in the early church. I don't think that Jesus or the apostles would even recognize it if they were to step into it today.
I think there's probably, I think we're meant to wrestle with those things. I think it's natural for the church over time to evolve certain new traditions and have maybe certain structures that can become a crutch or something like that. And I think it's beautiful when we can take a look at that and reconsider, hey, this is how we're doing things now. How does this line up with the Bible? And is this actually something that's serving us or not? And I think that's important both as individuals and as a church. There's a term that gets thrown out a lot called deconstruction,
Yes, it's a
and
bad word. It's a dirty word. We
it's
can't
a
use that
dirty
word.
word.
You
A
even
lot of people,
hesitated to say it, Chris. I saw. Oh man, their viewers. You just lost a couple followers, right?
all my evangelical Christian followers have just
Yeah.
tuned out. I love the word. I don't know that I love the word. I prefer the word reconstruction personally, but I think we should always be deconstructing. I think we should always be checking for doubts and listening to those. I think it's important to be checking ourselves and thinking critically about our faith and about the routines that we get into and about our perceptions and expectations about things like ministry and what should the church look like really, and like how does that line up. I think that's really beautiful
Well,
and
and,
scary
you
and
know,
scary.
yeah, it is. I don't want this to come across as I'm embittered towards anybody in
Hmm.
ministry at all. I think that there are people who are
Maybe one
doing
person.
it. Your parents are a prime example of people who I've always looked at as people that have pure hearts, that are truly doing it for unselfish reasons. And they've always shined the light of Jesus and have
Hmm.
never, ever caused us any form of questioning or doubt. And we've lost touch with them over the years, but I still
Hmm.
see them posting about their adventures, their ministry, their date anniversaries. And there are people out there that are still doing it right with the right intentions and the right heart. I think that the trap comes for certain people where they get a taste of the power and the prestige and the accolades, that they lose sight of what they initially started out as. And I think that truly that may have been what happened with the person that affected us so much. I
Hmm.
believe that maybe they started out with the right heart and the right intention, and over the years they became drunk with the power and the prestige
Hmm.
and the control, and lost sight of what they were truly supposed to be doing. I don't know that they'll ever come to a point of being humbled to realize the damage that they've done, not just to us. We're a drop in the bucket. And I'm not saying that to be overly dramatic. There is a long line of people before us and after us that
Hmm.
have been affected. Those are the ones that make it hard for you not to be cynical when you walk into any given church. I've had those battles myself where I'm picking apart what the pastor is saying or what the worship leader is saying because I see it in a different light, because I'm questioning what their motives are.
It puts you on a higher
Yes.
alert than
Yeah.
Yeah.
you might have
Absolutely.
been in the past. There was a natural trust maybe in the past, and now once you've been burned, it's hard not to
Like
see
I'm not
things
touching
through
that pot
analyze.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I think that makes sense. That's understandable. We're talking about one specific experience. I know you've had other experiences since then. We're not going to have time to go into those, but this is something that other people have experienced in other churches all across America, all across the world. What do you think would need to change in the Christian culture, in the church culture, for us to maybe not never see this again, because we're still dealing with humans at the end of the day, but what would have to change to really minimize this in the future?
Well, I think number one is what we're doing today, talking about it, not being ashamed of what has happened, holding people accountable. As far as ministry goes, I think that there definitely needs to be a place of checks and balances where no one person is the authority, because
Yeah.
obviously God is the ultimate authority. But if there's a person put in a leadership position that has nobody to answer to, it is very easy for them to abuse that power. Or I think that honestly, people just have to open their eyes and not bat down those red flags like Matt and I did for so
Hmm.
long. Ask the questions, hold the people accountable, even at the cost of being ostracized yourself. Because when those people aren't held accountable, they are going to go on to continue to do those same things and hurt other people.
Yeah.
And we are every person, pastor, churchgoer, random guy on the street who's never stepped foot in a church. We're all sinners. We all live in a fallen world. We're all going to have those tendencies to do those selfish things. But if we're not held accountable to them, then we're just going to continue in that behavior.
One, I 100% agree with Mandy. But towards the end, she said that we're all sinners. How do you stop this? I don't know if you can. And I'll explain what I mean is, you've heard, I don't know who said it or where it comes from, but, or maybe it's just a funny story where it says, I love your Jesus, but man, those Christians are terrible.
Yeah.
It's one thing when you're talking about Jesus, that's who you should be following. And I think a lot of the problem, we've talked about this over the course of the show, is that it's human nature to be wanting to or being pulled to follow a person rather than Jesus because of what they're saying or whatnot. I think for those who are doing it, they need to knock that crap off, because that's, gosh, you know how hard it is not to say what I'm really thinking.
Come on, just let loose. Let's hear it.
Oh shit. Okay. All right. But I think that the people who are doing it, when you were younger, and then, hey, mom, dad, when do I come home? Oh, just come home when the streetlights come on. There's parts of me that says, you know what, this, for those people that are doing this sort of crap to hurt others, their streetlight needs to come on, and they just need to go. They just need to go home. Whatever that looks like, they just need to go home. Don't bother us anymore. But for those who are going through it, one, they need to realize that it ain't right. It ain't right for that abuse to happen. And it's okay to ask the tough questions, because if
Yeah.
we truly believe that Jesus, who he says he is, if we truly believe, I mean, he can take those questions. He can take those, is this really okay on what they're doing in the name of Jesus? Because they're our spiritual leader, or they're supposed to be the person,
Yeah.
I hate to even use this phrase, to go to. And here they are, they're abusing the flock
Yeah.
when they are not supposed to be doing that. They're doing the exact opposite. But modern ministry, it I just think a lot needs to change.
Yeah.
A lot needs to change.
If you have an answer how to stop it, let us know.
I'll write
To
it
make
down.
people stop.
I'll write it down.
We just need a pope who can squash all that, I think. We
Let's
just
get the
need a
Pope over here.
Protestant pope, and
Yeah.
Yes.
that'll fix everything. No, I
Protestant.
think obviously there's no one solution. I think you've touched on some important things, which are like accountability matters. And that's such a biblical principle. We need accountability in our lives. Everybody does, even if you're not a Christian, like everybody, like it's something you need for different areas of your life, I think, especially anyone in authority. Like that is so important when you're entrusted with spiritual authority and financial career authority. There needs to be accountability for that,
Mhm.
because that is power, and we are all susceptible to corruption, to the corruption that comes from power and temptation and lack of accountability. I think we've all experienced times in our lives where we wish, looking back, I wish someone had held me accountable there. And without that, we're moving one direction or the other. And accountability, I think, is a huge part of ensuring that we're moving in the right direction and not sliding into self gratification. Where are you now? You've come through quite a bit of transition, full time ministry, getting burned pretty heavily.
The Cliff's Notes version is that when we moved here 10 years ago, we went straight from ministry in Salt Lake to helping to establish ministry here in Georgia. We were very heavily involved. I think that our hindsight looking back is we should have taken some time. We should have taken some time to deal with and heal from the trauma that we had experienced in Salt Lake. But we were in this mindset of ministry is our life and we don't know anything else. We jumped from one pot to another, and not in a bad way. I don't want to put a bad look on the ministry that we were involved with here, but it was some of the same mentalities. It was the same church leadership setup and the same expectations. And we went through some things. We were so burned out. And so we just finally put our foot down and said, we are completely 100% pulling back from serving. We need time to just be fed and ministered to ourselves. And unfortunately, what happens with that is things start pulling back and you're just not so heavily involved, and people start kind of, pulling away, unfortunately. And some of those things happened here. And again, we have deep love for a lot of people in Salt Lake as well as here. But since we pulled back from full-time ministry and even part-time ministry here, honestly, it's been a struggle. We have church hopped for the past several years. And to be honest, we haven't found any place that feels like home. And a lot of that is based on the past struggles that we've had and raising those questions and not being okay with the status quo of the way that things are done or taught or practiced. And so for me, it's been more of a struggle for me than it has for Matt. I'm just not in a good place of feeling like we have true fellowship anywhere. And so I feel like I'm in a place of no man's land right now, and I don't know where I or we belong. That doesn't mean we're not going to church. We are sporadically going. For me, it's more about our kids. I want them to have that foundation of belief. I want them to know who Jesus is. And if I'm not taking them, then I don't know. I have a fear that their salvation is at risk if I'm not doing my part to make sure that they are being exposed to fellowship with believers their age. And so for me, to be honest with you, it's obligation for me right now. And that's a hard thing for me to admit.
Yeah.
But again, if we're going to be accountable, if we expect other people to be accountable, we also need to be accountable. And that's where I'm at right now is I don't have a home spiritually right now. And that's a really hard place to be. And I don't know what the answer to is for that.
Mandy talked about where she's at right now. And I'm not on totally the same page as Mandy when it comes to that, but I strongly feel the same when it comes to, we're here in the South, we're here in Georgia, and it's different. It's just different. But then again, you can say that about Utah. All right. So every place is different. Every place has their traditions, whether or not whatever, but I can go into any church and I know that at some point at the very beginning, you've got a list of about 3 songs to go through. All I'm saying is that I don't read anywhere in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, 1st, 2nd Corinthians. I don't read anywhere where Peter didn't say, hang on, we're only on set 2. We're only on music sheet number 4. You got to wait until I'm done here before you talk. So Be quiet over there, Jesus. So I just think that it's the way that church is being done right now. It really isn't. I don't want to say it's not biblical, but I'm going to say that it's not biblical.
I told Matt yesterday, the church that we attend is literally at the top of our street. And when we were walking home yesterday, I was telling him, just sharing some concerns over my nervousness to do this podcast. And I just told him, we're not going to have a pretty little bow at the end to tie up.
Yeah.
Our story is still being written. We don't have all the answers. It's not like this pretty happy ending that we have, because our ending hasn't happened. And I think that anybody who claims that they have a pretty little bow and a happy ending, they're either not accepting that there's still unwritten pages of their story. And I'm just hoping that we get to a point where we are more settled with our relationship with the Lord and with his people. It's really hard not to ask those questions of why, and to be okay not having the answer. But we don't have a pretty little bow to put on a package at the end of this.
I disagree.
Time
I think that is a pretty little bow. I think that is
No, there's no bow, Chris.
I'm seeing the bow. This is my show. I say there's a bow. No, but
Um,
I think that is so important. I think there is, for all of the talk in the Gospels about God's grace, our need for him, the fact that we don't have it all together, all the examples throughout the story, Old Testament and New Testament, it's about people who don't have it all together. And we're just figuring it out through relationship with God. For all of that, our human nature is still to want to present everything in pretty little bows. I know that's my nature, is to want to just be like, and then I figured it all out,
right.
and then lived happily ever after, and it was great. And I love hearing you say that you haven't, because that's the minute we have it all figured out is the minute we're turning off critical thinking. It's the minute we're not actually evaluating. It's the minute we're ignoring those red flags. It should be a continuous journey, right? It should be something we're continually figuring out. People will talk like the Bible is black and white and everything is super clear. And I've read it. A lot of it is not. There's some things super clear. God is love. That's super clear. There's a
Right.
lot that isn't, and I think that's because it's not meant to be a substitute for God. It's meant to point us to him. And relationships, every relationship is going to have mystery to it. It's going to be continually figuring each other out. You two, I'm sure, have figured each other out completely, and everything's set in stone.
We've already put a bow on each other
And you
more than
can
once.
just pretty much just coast from here on out.
We've got it in the bag.
Yeah.
No issues ever again.
Yeah. No relationship is actually like that. Every relationship, and if we have relationship with God, you're gonna be in that middle ground sometimes, like figuring out what is going on.
Right.
And I think acknowledging that and not pretending it doesn't exist is super healthy. And I thank you guys so much for sharing your story. I feel like this touches on so many topics that are near and dear to my heart. If people are wanting to find you, do you have anything you want to share? Or you're like, no, I don't want you to find me?
I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Just search me by my name, which you'll have, I'm sure, in the description. Same with Matt. We've had people reach out to us because they knew we had a story, and they reached out to us and asked how we could help them get through the situation that they weren't expecting either.
Yeah.
And so we are always open to have those discussions with people if they're struggling, if they're questioning. We don't want anybody to have to go through what we did.
Yes, we're there. But as far as social, Matt_Lomeli is on Instagram.
I don't even know what mine
I
is.
know because I use Instagram, but I never pay attention to what my username is. And Facebook, for those over 40 who use it, Matt Lomeli. But one thing that I want to add, Chris, is Mandy mentioned something yesterday is we were just chit-chatting. Inside the church, Paul is looked at this huge hero of the faith, and I'm not taking anything away from Paul. But in the message we were looking at yesterday was Peter and how he trusted Jesus, but he still screwed up and had questions and he wasn't perfect. And in a Paul world, don't feel bad if you're a Peter.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again. Again, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Shift Storm. Please leave us a review wherever you found this show, whatever podcatcher you're using. If you liked it, leave us a review. If you didn't, don't. Just send me a letter of complaint. And as always, check out more at shiftstormpodcast.com.